Thank you so much. My name's AnneMarie. I'm very delighted as well to be here today with my co-presenter, Ryan. We're going to tell you about some case study work that we've been doing for the past almost 6 years now. But before we start, I just wanted to take a second and extend our appreciation to Laura and Louise and everyone at the Working with Dementia group to give us the opportunity to present today. We're looking forward to it. So for today's webinar, we're going to focus primarily on our case studies. And they're exploring how organizations can support the aging workforce, being more inclusive for people who develop cognitive impairment while on the job. Before we dive in, I'm going to briefly introduce our larger research program, CogAtWork, provide some background on mild cognitive impairment and dementia to kind of explain why these issues should matter to employers. And then we're going to walk through what we did for the study, highlight our key findings, just a small segment, to be honest. There's so much data from these studies, and end with the recommendations that emerged from this research. So CogAtWork was a 5-year-long project funded by AgeWell, and it ended in 2024. AgeWell supported nearly 30 projects similar to ours that were focused on aging and technology. Our project specifically addressed 2 challenge areas. One was financial wellness and employment, and the other was cognitive health and dementia. So through several initiatives, CogAtWork, we aim to kind of improve our understanding of how disabilities related to mild cognitive impairment and dementia in the workplace. And we wanted to identify what information, skills, or technologies employers needed to help them build kind of sustainable and inclusive workspaces for anyone who developed these conditions while working still. So in addition to AgeWell, our project was made possible by our amazing team of investigators, and we had a big group of folks, including trainees and collaborators who helped us, some of which who might be here today, including Arlene, and also Ryan. So we're very fortunate to have Ryan with us here today. He volunteered countless hours to the CogAtWork project as a key member of our advisory group. Professionally, Ryan is an accomplished executive with experience in public sector operations, where he specializes in data-driven service improvement, stakeholder collaboration, and inclusive leadership. He's also a committed mentor and advocate for inclusive employment, and that was in part shaped by supporting an employee who developed dementia while on the job. He brings strategic insight, empathy, and a drive for meaningful system change to all of his roles. We were also fortunate to collaborate with Roger Marple. Roger was diagnosed with early onset dementia while he was still working. And after his retirement, he joined the AgeWell community, and he helped advocate for older adults who developed early onset dementia. When Roger joined the CogAtWork team back in 2019, he was the person who actually connected us with Ryan. At the time of Roger's dementia diagnosis, he was still working full-time, and Ryan happened to be his director at work. After Roger disclosed that diagnosis to Ryan, Ryan supported his continued employment and eventually Roger's transition into retirement. Our case study work was then largely inspired by Ryan and Roger. Together, their insights, they've been key to shaping our analyses and kind of guiding the future of this work. So let's start with why we're here, really. Most of this is coming from the Canadian context, but it does apply globally as well. So for us, the Canadian population is aging. By 2030, nearly 1 in 4 of us are going to be over 65, and this shift is already reshaping the workforce. Globally, workers 55 and older are also the fastest growing group in the workforce, and in Canada, they represent more than 1 in 5 workers now. And so naturally, as people work longer, it's going to be quite normal for some thinking and memory skills to change with age. That's a normal part of aging. But for some people, those changes go well beyond typical aging. Mild cognitive impairment and dementia. These conditions affect memory, attention, decision-making, and even behavior. And they make the day-to-day work tasks that you would normally do more challenging. So just briefly, dementia in itself is just an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term for a collection of diseases that damage the brain. Depending on the area of the brain that's affected, people experience any number of problems with either memory, thinking, language, navigational skills, problem solving. They might experience sensory changes, mood changes, or even personality changes. These changes are progressive and they're irreversible with dementias. In contrast, mild cognitive impairment, which I'm going to refer to as MCI, that's more of a state between normal aging and dementia. Those changes are noticeable, they're subtle, we can measure them, but they're much less severe, and often people can continue on with their daily activities with minor changes. A few points do hold true, though, across both conditions. No two cases are the same. The symptoms, the severity of those symptoms, and the progression of each individual symptom, they can vary even within the same individual. Early recognition is difficult. People often develop workarounds. They delay seeking help. The diagnostic process itself is quite complex. And especially for people under 65, those symptoms are readily attributed to your stress, your lack of sleep, you've got too many family responsibilities. They're not attributed to something that might be going on along a disease process. And importantly, stigma around cognitive impairment is also quite common. It discourages people from disclosing their condition or seeking support. And people often assume that these conditions only affect the oldest of old individuals, and they're more hesitant to attribute changes in memory and thinking to someone who's middle-aged or younger. Interestingly, though, these earliest signs of MCI and dementia are often detected in the workplace as people go about their day-to-day activities that they'd normally be doing. And so despite the impact of cognitive impairment on their job, these changes quite often go unnoticed, they're ignored, or worse, they're misattributed to declining performance. So at work, cognitive impairment could show up as any number of things. You have missed deadlines, difficulty completing tasks that you were once, quite familiar with, trouble learning new procedures or learning new software. There's a lot of reduced stamina or concentration. There could be noticeable changes in mood, people's temperaments, their personalities, even the way they communicate. People might seem more tired, they might be more frustrated. People might be uncharacteristically, agitated if you point out the mistakes they're making. All of these things, though, of course, taken together, they're, again, easily attributed to other things, stress or whatnot. And so before we move on, I think this is a really good time to pause and bring Ryan into this conversation because he has far more insight than I do. Ryan, I wanted to ask you, from your experience supporting Roger, how did you realize something might be going on with him?
Yeah, I appreciate it, AnneMarie, and welcome to everyone. To be honest, I really missed most of the early signs with Roger, largely due to my lack of knowledge about MCI or dementia, and specifically how to manage these conditions in the workplace. To the point where, as Roger declined, his work quality was so significantly impacted that I considered initiating performance management, and something that I really didn't want to do. And there was a particular instance, a striking example was when Roger submitted a spreadsheet and it was just filled with errors and inconsistencies. And we had just talked about this the day before, and I followed up with him after that, and he genuinely did not understand what had happened or how he had even produced this worksheet and what was going on. It was a complete mess. So we both laughed it off in the moment, but it clearly indicated that something deeper was going on with Roger. As I've reflected upon this further, there are three things or three signs I should have noticed earlier, each of which was unusual behavior for Roger. The first was missed deadlines and work assignments, such as new reporting requirements. The second, had overly emotional responses sometimes to what would be seemingly minor situations, and initially just kind of chalked it up as having a bad day. And then the third was difficulty with him following instructions or adapting to new technologies or processes, and specifically with spreadsheets and computers. Any new technology was a real struggle for Roger.
Thanks. And I think what you're pointing out really just kind of highlights the importance of how much managers are lacking the support and education and resources to prepare them to support employees who might encounter these conditions. And you knew Roger well. You'd been working together. You didn't actually miss signs upon reflection. You paid attention to even subtle stuff that you're describing. But without that background in what these conditions are, it's hard to attribute those things accurately. Moving on to kind of the legal aspect of this, what we do know is that any worker that's diagnosed with MCI or dementia has a disability, and they're entitled to accommodations in the workplace. And even more than that, under most employment laws, employers have to remove barriers that prevent that employee's full participation in work, unless it would cause them undue hardship. And reaching that bar for undue hardship is quite challenging for many organizations. There's multiple contexts that are contextual factors that impact that. But generally, it's quite difficult. So most employees are entitled to these accommodations. Outcomes for employees who develop cognitive impairment, quite often, they don't match the organization's often very positive and supportive position on accommodating anyone who developed disabilities while they're on the job, nor do they reflect the outcomes of individuals who might be working with disabilities in the same organization, but perhaps their disability is more visible or better understood. So typically employees don't access supports and accommodations they're entitled to. People find workarounds for any sort of challenges they begin experiencing. Often people self-select out of the workplace on their own accord. In our interviews, we heard people refusing promotions, refusing to take on new work to try to mask some of the issues they were experiencing. And then the worst case, of course, is employees are terminated for declining performance erroneously. These are really undesirable outcomes, and they're unfortunately quite typical. And these negative outcomes also are the same for the organization, though. There's going to be increased presenteeism, absenteeism, and reduced productivity. When you lose valuable employees because they choose to leave or they choose to not take on new responsibility, the organization loses out on valuable institutional knowledge. And then in some jobs, if people are experiencing new functional limitations related to MCI and dementia, there could even be an elevated risk for health and safety, depending on what their roles are. You can imagine in more sensitive roles. So if you're a doctor or you're in a position of authority or management, it can have a larger impact. And more importantly, there's legal risk. So any organization that fails to accommodate someone who develops disabilities related to these conditions, they can face wrongful dismissal claims or non-compliance claims with disability legislation. And yet, the employer-focused research in this area has been quite limited. What we do know is quite consistent, though. Cognitive impairment is often quite misunderstood. Empathy from employers is unevenly distributed, and stigma and discrimination is quite common, unfortunately. And despite the clear labor force trends that I was talking about at the outset in terms of the changing face of the workforce, most employers report not being overly concerned about the impact of an aging workforce on their overall structure function. This is just one example. This is a 2013 study of over 500 employers across various sectors, and less than half, I think about 41% overall, were very concerned about this issue and the impact it was going to have and their ability to put in supports for these employees. So that brings us to our research program. So to understand how workplaces are responding to an aging workforce and the increased risk for cognitive impairment, we partnered with two large not-for-profit organizations across these sites. We were able to interview 97 participants. We conducted 1 hour in-depth interviews or more with each, and these were employees at all levels of the organization. For today's presentation, we're going to kind of approach it as a 360 view of the experience of managers, those who supported employees with cognitive impairment, like Brian, managers who lived with cognitive impairment, as well as some co-workers who kind of assume managerial responsibilities to support. So just quickly, a bit about our organizations. One was a federally regulated public sector employer in Central Canada. One was a provincially regulated healthcare employer in Western Canada. Both were quite similar. They were responsible for program and service delivery. They both had a mix of union and non-unionized employees, and they both allowed for hybrid work arrangements wherever it was appropriate. Our participants were any employee of the organization. We had no exclusion criteria. And the sample was mostly women, around 50 years old. They were well educated, and in both organizations, roughly half of our participants held supervisory roles. To protect the privacy of our participants, we're not using job titles, but we've recategorized everyone based on 4 categories. Executive and management was anyone who had a direct report. And then we had senior employees and employees. And again, over half of our sample were either management or executive who were supervising other employees. For today's presentation, we're going to focus entirely on our interview data. To analyze these interviews, it took a while. It was about a 2-year process, and we took an abductive approach, which combined both deductive and inductive methods. So what I mean by that is we kind of started with some theories to guide our coding, and then we also looked, though, for new ideas or themes that emerged from the data. So we analyzed all 97 transcripts. There was 4 of us, and all 4 of us read each one multiple times. We moved back and forth between the transcripts, looking for kind of how well that data fit the theories we had selected, as well as we added anything new that emerged from the data to the analysis as well. That kind of let us build these new themes that we came up with that were informed not only by kind of the theory, but also by kind of the real experiences and reporting we were getting from our participants. And so the rationale for selecting these theories is kind of beyond the scope and time we have today, but we can talk about that in the discussion if anyone has any questions. So I'm going to jump right into the results, and I'm going to try to be brief here and invite Ryan to kind of talk about each of our themes as well. So empathy, first and foremost, emerged as kind of the key driver of workplace inclusion. In an organization, it's in their best interest to develop empathic leadership in their managers. They want to equip managers with the skills and resources to foster inclusivity. In our interviews, empathic managers increase job resources. They did this by offering social support, reducing stress. They created psychological safety among their employees. They also worked with the employee to co-design their accommodations, and they found a way to balance those people's individual needs, but also the organizational needs. And this approach obviously had benefits. It encouraged employees to disclose their needs, and without disclosure, this process doesn't work. It was essential for success, and it strengthened trusted relationships between employees and managers. It also, really importantly, eased cognitive demands on these individuals who were living with cognitive impairment. It helped employees stay productive and feel valued. As you can read by some of our quotes here, the first one here is, empathy from my manager was key. She didn't just follow the rules. She understood my needs and adjusted my tasks without going through lengthy processes. We had many managers too who had experiences either with supporting someone else who had cognitive impairment or were experiencing issues themselves, as with that last quote there. And that also helped them kind of guide their approach. So Ryan, here's where I want to bring you in here. Following his disclosure, you really helped Roger continue his work and transition into retirement with dignity. How did you incorporate empathic leadership into your management strategies?
Yeah, sure. So incorporating empathic leadership into my management strategy meant using more structure than I had in the past in terms of managing Roger, being present because Roger and I actually were at different work sites, and having a genuine connection to support Roger as his needs changed. Our daily huddles, which were already established and part of our routine, created consistent opportunities for personal check-ins and helped build a foundation of trust and psychological safety long before this condition became more complex. The daily huddle also included Roger's coworkers, other supervisors that were part of the team, so he had some additional support. So as Roger entered a clinical trial and began adjusting to new medications, it became more intentional in my listening to, validating his concerns, redirecting clinical questions to the research team, and offering steady encouragement so he felt supported rather than overwhelmed. If he needed to take the day off on short notice, we always would just figure it out. Physical presence was also critical. Even though he worked 90 minutes away, I committed to being on site at least weekly and made additional unannounced visits when needed or as I felt was required. These interactions allowed me to understand his environment firsthand and reinforce that he was not facing these challenges alone. It showed him that his success was my priority. I also recognized where I fell short. I did not adequately prepare or educate his team about how to support Roger because he was the supervisor at the time of a team of about 10. So this really did limit their ability to contribute to an inclusive and understanding environment. This experience showed me that empathy must extend beyond one-on-one support to intentionally guiding the entire team, not just the individual that has the disability. Ultimately, empathic leadership meant meeting Roger where he was, adapting to his evolving needs, and ensuring he felt valued and connected as he transitioned toward retirement. It reinforced that empathy is an ongoing commitment to listening, presence, and always relationship building.
That's really useful, Ryan. I think that, as a manager, you're one person, you can do only so much with the resources that you have. In your experience, were there any ways in which the organization itself, perhaps through its policies or its organizational structure, how they can create some barriers to managers like yourself taking a similar approach and implementing the same policies and kind of managerial style that you did to support employees like Roger.
Yeah, certainly there are, AnneMarie. There are definitely ways in which organizational policies and structures can make it more challenging for managers to take a similar empathic approach. High workloads, competing operational pressures mean leaders often have limited time to provide the consistent check-ins and follow-up that employees with cognitive changes may require. The time involved in coordinating accommodations, collaborating with human resources or ability management team, and adjusting duties can be difficult to manage alongside daily responsibilities. The organization's strong emphasis on performance metrics can also shift leaders' attention toward measurable outcomes rather than the relational work needed to support someone experiencing declining cognitive function. In periods of organizational instability or restructuring, which healthcare is notorious for, employees like Roger could easily fall through the cracks, especially when continuity of support may be disrupted. Privacy limitations also add another layer of complexity because managers can disclose very little to the broader team. It becomes difficult to explain observable behavioral or performance changes to, in this case, would be Roger's team. This is particularly challenging when the employee is in a supervisory role and team relationships may have already been strained due to behavioral changes over the period of time. Without the ability to share the context, building understanding or cohesion within the team is far more difficult. These factors don't prevent empathic leadership, but they can create a real barrier that managers must navigate carefully when supporting employees with conditions such as dementia.
So Ryan basically just gave you my second presentation on the barriers and enablers to this in his response there.
Sorry.
And no, it's perfect. No. Hey, you got a second presentation here today. The other piece of this work is really what everything that Ryan just summarized here for us in terms of some of the walls that managers really struggle with to overcome when they're trying to do the right thing and manage the way Ryan did with Roger. He eloquently described some of the real challenges that they face. So moving on to our next finding was that successful accommodation depended on steady communication between managers and employees. These ongoing feedback loops that we noticed helped both sides see what was working, what needed adjusting, and help them make changes in real time. Flexibility was also essential. Accommodations had to shift as symptoms fluctuated or progressed. And because no two cases are the same as we mentioned, solutions had to be quite individualized. But what we found was that when there was a constant feedback loop between managers and employees, everyone felt better supported. And the knock-on effect was that there was resilience built into the relationship and the organization, and employees were able to continue in their job. Ryan, your organization moved away from traditional performance evaluations, and you kind of just alluded to it into some of your discussion around metrics in terms of evaluation. We heard they could be quite rigid and even punitive for anyone who was working with accommodations. How did shifting to more of a mentorship approach or a coaching model kind of impact your approach to supervising, Roger?
Yeah, so shifting to this type of model where it was mentorship and coaching, it did enhance my management approach, especially for Roger and his condition. It established ongoing meaningful communication that became essential for continuous feedback, allowing us to evaluate the effectiveness of accommodations regularly and adjust them proactively as Roger's needs evolved. So it was two-way communication, and it was constant. This model inherently prioritized flexibility, recognizing that cognitive impairments fluctuate and progress uniquely for each individual. By engaging Roger in frequent, candid conversations about what accommodations were effective, we developed solutions tailored specifically to his changing circumstances. My favorite question for Roger was something like, "What do you want to do about this?" Or "What's your plan?" Ownership of decisions was really key to his success and our success in this relationship. The mentorship approach strengthened Roger's resilience as he consistently felt heard, valued, and supported. Our collaborative efforts demonstrated genuine commitment and responsiveness that ultimately facilitated Roger's productivity and dignity throughout his transition into retirement.
Ryan. Moving on to the next finding, we found that decentralized decision-making really empowered employees. It signaled trust, both to employees, whether they were managers or their direct reports. They felt their expertise was valued. When managers had the authority and resources to make accommodation decisions without having to go through layers of approvals, they felt more confident and better equipped to support employees. At the employee level, this kind of looked at supporting grassroots employee-led disability groups across their organizations. So organizations either gave them time, funding, or they had representative leadership at these meetings. It showed a strong commitment to inclusion. And so, Ryan, we've spoken at length about this, but how might shifting to more of a decision-making authority to a frontline leaders kind of influence their confidence and ability to respond quickly and empathically to employees who might have evolving cognitive needs?
I think making that shift really strengthens their confidence and capacity to respond quickly. When leaders are trusted to act without navigating layers of approval, they can focus on understanding the employee's situation in situ, tailoring accommodations accordingly and providing timely support rather than being slowed down, perhaps by what's seen as procedural barriers. This autonomy also allows leaders to invest more intentionally in maintaining a meaningful relationship with the employee, which is essential in navigating sensitive or evolving health issues. It really is all about the person. However, with increased authority also comes increased responsibility. In Roger's case, as his direct supervisor, I carried full responsibility for his performance and for managing the risks associated with his declining cognitive function. This required careful judgment and a thoughtful balance of empathy, accountability, and relationship management. I needed to support Roger while maintaining service expectations and at the same time preserve trust, dignity, and open communication between us. The ability to make decisions closer to the situation allowed me to respond more quickly and personally, but it also meant I had to be deliberate and fully prepared to own the outcomes of those decisions. Overall, decentralized authority, I really believe, can empower leaders to act with empathy, agility, and relational awareness, provided that they are equipped with the training, resources, and organizational backing needed to manage the added responsibilities effectively.
Yeah, there's always that balance that it's difficult to do some of these things without your organization's support. Finally, our last theme kind of revolves around technology. And we found that tech could be a double-edged sword. We saw that both digital and non-digital tools were used to support accommodations, but when it came to cognitive impairment, most of them were low tech to no tech. Across roles, participants said they often didn't know what technologies existed or how to even request them to support their disability. And even when they did, the approval processes could be slow. Many assistive tools weren't compatible with the existing technology that they had to use in the organization as well. As a result, some employees went months without needed supports. Some people left their roles altogether because of this, and it directly affected their performance. What we did find, though, is that whatever technology was selected, it had to be really adaptive to support someone who was dealing with disabilities related to cognitive impairment. And the goal was to kind of have it match someone's needs as they evolved. And the most effective tools for employees who were working with disabilities was something that they were already familiar and was easy to use. So Ryan, I'd like your perspective on this as a manager. What tech would have been useful while you were helping Roger, and anything you actually used that was helpful at the time?
Okay, yeah. So as Roger supporting him was a blend of digital technologies as well. Would have been really helpful. I've just learned in the past 5 years some additional tools that are now available that I would have loved to have had back then, but I didn't. So what we did was we had automated reminders, scheduling tools such as digital calendars with intuitive alerts, actively scheduling dedicated blocks of time for specific tasks would have significantly reduced Roger's cognitive load by just streamlining task management overall. Additionally, simplified user interfaces tailored specifically to his strengths could have minimized frustration by easing daily interactions. For instance, we successfully utilized spreadsheet templates that eliminated the complexity of creating documents, allowing Roger just to focus solely on data entry and analysis. Throughout this approach, prioritizing the use of familiar technology further enhanced effectiveness by reducing barriers associated with learning new systems. Adaptability was a critical factor across these technologies, ensuring that digital tools and accommodations could flexibly evolve to match Roger's changing cognitive abilities and workload requirements in real time. This adaptability depended heavily on consistent feedback loops, active involvement from Roger himself, and prioritizing intuitive and familiar technologies to minimize stress and maintain ongoing effectiveness. Accommodations that remained responsive rather than static prevented frustration and supported Roger's productivity, confidence, and his dignity.
Thanks for that, Ryan. This was probably some of the most interesting data that emerged from the study. And again, we don't have time to get into the weeds of the tech piece, but there are some really innovative ways that people independently brought in technology to use in the workplace that was allowed. Sometimes it wasn't allowed, but it was how they managed to work within the confines of their abilities and still maintain their work productivity. So this piece is a piece that we will focus on later on in our future research. So moving on to kind of how we summarized and what we took away from these data. From our findings, there were 5 key actions that organizations could take. First, we argue that organizations need to treat empathy as a strategic asset. They need to build empathic leadership into HR practices and training. They need to support employee-led disability groups and assess accommodations based on organizational fit, not just compliance. Second, everyone needs to be educated, staff through managers to executive leadership, about MCI and young onset dementia. They need to educate people on disclosure rights, as well as shared responsibilities that your colleagues even have to support employees. Third, decentralized authority, so managers can implement accommodations quickly without layers of approval. That seems to be the linchpin in terms of building trust between managers and employees and fostering that open communication that made cases like Roger and Ryan possible. Fourth, use continuous feedback and flexible adjustments. This keeps employees engaged, supported. It helps people be very responsive in real time and not let issues spiral out. That way, employees always feel like they can be open with their accommodation needs. And then finally, leverage technology. If it's adaptive and it fits existing workflows, it should help. And it should enable personalized supports. So Ryan, finally, do these takeaways kind of resonate with your experiences?
Yeah, I really think they do. I mean, empathy is essential for sustainable and strategic inclusion and central to effective leadership, no matter who you're dealing with and who your staff are. Meeting employees where they are through genuine understanding and flexibility really creates a foundation for meaningful accommodations. Employees must have ownership over decisions and action plans, promoting personal accountability and ensuring solutions align closely with their lived experiences and evolving capabilities. Clearly defining what success and failure look like is also essential to establishing transparent benchmarks and outcomes for the individuals. This approach ensures employees and managers share clear understanding of expectations, enabling them to objectively assess progress. Such clarity also supports constructive feedback loops, which are necessary for adjusting in real time. Additionally, successful accommodations inherently depend on pre-existing relationships based on trust, mutual respect, and open communication. Leaders must demonstrate authenticity by genuinely caring and showing commitment, because authenticity fosters the trust, encourages honest disclosures, and strengthens organizational resilience. These additional considerations would include, I would say, establishing structured yet flexible frameworks that provide clear guidelines while allowing customization for individual circumstances. Second, engaging comprehensive stakeholder involvement, such as human resources, occupational health, other peer networks, to distribute responsibility and strengthen accountability. And then finally, proactively planning for long-term sustainability to ensure accommodations remain effective and adaptable rather than just temporary or reactive. Ultimately, authentic, empathic leadership combined with clearly defined goals and open dialogue significantly strengthens organizational resilience, inclusivity, and overall employee well-being.
Thanks, Ryan. Finally, we have plans to take this research further. We're exploring research looking at the longitudinal impacts of empathy-driven management. We'd like to look at this across sectors and look at how different job sectors might be able to implement this given the different risks and job responsibilities. And then obviously explore technology, in particular, the role of AI in cognitive support tools. So finally, Ryan, any thoughts on other future directions or these for where we should go next?
I really like all of these, really. I think they have a strong potential to better equip employers to support cognitive impairment in the workplace. A longitudinal study on empathy-driven management can really validate what my experience showed, that sustained relationship-based leadership directly improves well-being, retention, and overall productivity. A cross-sector comparison would be especially valuable as different environments not only have varying policies, but also different core values. And it's often the organizations where values are truly lived, not just written on the wall, that really create the most supportive and stigma-free environments. Finally, AI-driven cognitive support tools. I think there's tremendous promise here. Automating tasks, providing reminders, reducing cognitive load could really enhance independence and effectiveness for employees. So together, yeah, I think this is a great path, and I'm looking forward to working with you and your team in the future.
So much. So we're going to end here generally. Thank you, Ryan, again, for bringing your perspective and expertise to this discussion today. Our research team has been incredibly grateful to your participation in events like this and others, because sharing your story within the context of our work, I think it helps people appreciate not only the complexities of this, but also importantly, it kind of brings hope to what's often a difficult situation. And your approach to supporting Roger, I think, really sets kind of a gold bar standard for what managers should aspire to do in these situations. Before we end and move on to questions, I'd like to take a quick moment, though, to pay tribute to our project lead, Josephine. Her passion for this project, along with her relentless authenticity and her capacity for listening and empathy, is really the sole reason these organizations agreed to open their doors, were vulnerable with us, and allowed us to work so closely with their employees for years to collect this incredible data set. And also pay tribute to our collaborator, Roger. He brought vulnerability to every meeting and every interview. He graciously volunteered for it. He insisted his former employer let all of his managers and colleagues speak openly. He often told me he wanted me to get the dirt on it, and he wanted people to learn from his experiences working following his dementia diagnosis. He was committed to helping not only employers but others benefit from his experience. And with that, thank you so much for your time and attention today, and it would be our pleasure to take any questions you might have.